So I am um, presenting a book that was um, part of my formative development in high school. I would ditch school to read this book because the history books that we read in school were um, whitewashed and bland in comparison to the actual events that occurred. I started to suspect it, and once I started reading this book, I knew that I had to keep ditching school because school had nothing for me. This is People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. I've heard it's been required reading in some high school um, environments, and that would be excellent if I had someone to talk to about the things I was reading. Unfortunately, I was left to ponder these great brutalities and questions and colonial questions alone. Um, it's a new type of history. Some people call it revisionist history. Um, Howard Zinn says, admits that he takes the minority perspective. So he will take the accounts um, of the brutalized, of those who lost, and you'll see that more here. So this is the first chapter of People's History of the United States. It um, talks about Columbus's first arrival in America. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. They first got to an island in the Bahamas, is where Columbus first saw land. And when they approached land, here's a quote from the book, they were met by the Arawak Indians who swam out to greet them. The Arawaks lived in village communes and had developed agriculture of corn, yams, and cassava. They would spin and weave, but they had no horses or work animals. They had no iron, but they wore tiny gold ornaments in their ears. This was to have enormous consequences. It led Columbus to take some of them aboard ship as prisoners because he insisted that they guide him to the source of the gold. He then sailed to what is now Cuba, then to Hispaniola, the island which is today Haiti and the Dominican Republic. There, bits of visible gold in the rivers and a gold mask presented to Columbus by a local Indian chief led to wild visions of gold fields. And you hear about Columbus that he had promised the royal family gold riches beyond their wildest dreams, and a new route to Southeast Asia. But what he discovered was some islands in the Americas. Firstly, here's from the book. These Arawaks of the Bahama Islands were much like Indians on the mainland, who were remarkable. European observers were to say again and again, for their hospitality, their belief in sharing. These traits did not stand out in the Europe of the Renaissance, dominated as it was by the religion of popes, the government of kings, the frenzy for money that marked Western civilization, and its first messenger to the Americas, Christopher Columbus. Columbus, who first, upon meeting these hospitable people, immediately took them prisoner to find out where the gold was. Columbus writes himself, as soon as I arrived in the Indies on the first island which I found, I took some of the natives by force in order that they might learn and might give me information of whatever there is in these parts. So in order that they might learn, I don't know what he means by that, but I'm pretty sure it's domination. The information that Columbus wanted most was, where's the gold? He had persuaded the king and queen of Spain to finance an expedition to the lands the wealth he expected would be on the other side of the Atlantic. And Columbus was promised 10% of the profits, governorship over newfound lands, and the fame that would go with a new title, Admiral of the Ocean Sea. Yeah. Some historians would remark that despite Columbus's atrocities, as we'll see, that he was a great navigator, or that he was a great seaman, but he completely misrepresented, or he completely miscalculated the size of the globe and landed in the Americas instead of India, which he thought he landed in. So now, from his base on Haiti, Columbus sent expedition after expedition into the interior. This is where the Indians told him there was gold. They found no gold fields, but had to fill up the ships returning to Spain with some kind of dividend. In the year 1495, they went on a great slave raid, rounded up 1,500 Arawak men, women, and children, put them in pens guarded by Spaniards and dogs, and then picked the 500 best specimens to load onto ships. Of those 500, 200 died en route. In the province of Chicao on Haiti, where he and his men imagined huge gold fields to exist, they ordered all persons 14 years or older to collect a certain quantity of gold every 3 months. When they brought it, they were given copper tokens to hang around their necks. Indians found without a copper token had their hands cut off and bled to death. The Indians had been given an impossible task. The only gold around was bits of dust garnered from the streams. So they fled, were hunted down with dogs, and were killed. Trying to put together an army of resistance, the Arawaks faced Spaniards who had armor, muskets, swords, horses. When the Spaniards took prisoners, they hanged them or burned them to death. Among the Arawaks, mass suicides began, with cassava poison. Infants were killed to save them from the Spaniards. In 2 years, through murder, mutilation, or suicide, half of the 250,000 Indians on Haiti were dead. When it became clear that there was no gold left, the Indians were taken as slave labor on huge estates, known later as encomiendas. They were worked at a ferocious pace and died by the thousands. By the year 1515, there were perhaps 50,000 Indians left. By 1550, there were 500. So 250,000 down to 500 in population. A report of the year 1650 shows none of the original Arawaks or their descendants left on the island. 250,000 people could be attributed to Columbus's tally of murder. This is the person we hear of in high school or government school as simply discovering America. That's it. Very little history surrounding it. Just kind of a name, a date, and that's what we're given in school. That's our bland, whitewashed version of history. Howard Zinn is speaking from the point of view of the slaughtered, which were ignored. I don't call this revisionist history. I call this completionist history. Almost all of the accounts that are described in Howard Zinn's book are proven to be true. Robert McNamara, in his biopic, he has it is actually available on either Tubi or Pluto, but it's actually the biography of Robert McNamara, and he admits in his biography the precedent for the Vietnam War, which was the Gulf of Tonkin, never happened. And Howard Zinn describes that in the book People's History of the United States, that the Gulf of Tonkin either never happened, or it was the United States who fired first, and possibly the United States firing first on nothing at all. So a ghost ship that they fired at, and then declared a war which tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of American troops died, and millions of Vietnam soldiers and civilians died. Howard Zinn's accounts are true. It's not revisionist. It is the dark corners that no one wanted to look at before. Here's more. Las Casas, a writer who sees what the Spaniards are doing down in the Bahamas, travels and writes an account. He tells how the Spaniards grew more conceited every day, and after a while refused to walk any distance. They rode the backs of Indians if they were in a hurry, or were carried on hammocks by Indians running in relays. In this case, they also had Indians carry large leaves to shade them from the sun, and others to fan them with goose wings. Total control led to total cruelty. The Spaniards thought nothing of knifing Indians by 10s and 20s, and of cutting slices of them to test the sharpness of their blades. Indians' attempts to defend themselves failed, and when they ran off into the hills, they were found and killed. So Las Casas reports, they suffered and died in the mines and other labors in desperate silence, knowing not a soul in the world to whom they could turn for help. Thus began the history 500 years ago of the European invasion of the Indian settlements in the Americas. That beginning is conquest, slavery, death. When we read the history books given to children in the United States, it all starts with heroic adventure. There is no bloodshed, and Columbus Day is a celebration. And Howard Zinn describes this first glaring fact that the account of Columbus in itself is a definition of what this history book is going to be like. He writes, "It is not that the historian can avoid emphasis of some facts and not of others. This is as natural to him as to the map maker, who, in order to produce a usable drawing for practical purposes, must first flatten and distort the shape of the earth, then choose out of the bewildering mass of geographic information those things needed for the purpose of this or that particular map. My argument cannot be against selection, simplification, emphasis, which are inevitable for both cartographers and historians. But the mapmaker's distortion is a technical necessity for a common purpose shared by all people who need maps. The historian's distortion is more than technical. It is ideological. It is released into a world of contending interests where any chosen emphasis supports, whether the historian means to or not, some kind of interest, whether economic or political or racial or national or sexual." So, Howard Zinn describing how history can be accounts of history can be chauvinistic, and that introducing the concept of gender relations and gender identity into our proper lexicon of history To emphasize the heroism of Columbus and his successors as navigators and discoverers, and to de-emphasize their genocide is not a technical necessity, but an ideological choice. It serves unwittingly to justify what was done. My point is not that we must, in telling history, accuse, judge, condemn Columbus in absentia. It is too late for that. It would be a useless scholarly exercise in morality. But the easy acceptance of atrocities is as a deplorable but necessary price to pay for progress. Hiroshima and Vietnam to save Western civilization, Kronstadt and Hungary to save socialism, nuclear proliferation to save us all. That is still with us. One reason these atrocities are still with us is that we have learned to bury them in a mass of other facts, as radioactive wastes are buried in containers in the earth. We have learned to give them exactly the same proportion of attention that teachers and writers often give them in the most respectable of classrooms and textbooks. This learned sense of moral proportion, coming from the apparent objectivity of the scholar, is accepted more easily than when it comes from politicians at press conferences. It is therefore more deadly. Quiet acceptance of conquest and murder in the name of progress is only one aspect of a certain approach to history, in which the past is told from the point of view of governments, conquerors, diplomats, leaders. It is as if they, like Columbus, deserve universal acceptance, as if they, the founding fathers, Jackson, Lincoln, Wilson, Roosevelt, Kennedy, the leading members of Congress, the famous justices of the Supreme Court, represent the nation as a whole. The pretense is that there really is such a thing as the United States, subject to occasional conflicts and quarrels, but fundamentally a community of people with common interests. It is as if there really is a national interest represented in the Constitution, in territorial expansion, in the laws passed by Congress, the decisions of the courts, the development of capitalism, the culture of education, and the mass media. So, I'm reading this in school, sophomore, junior year. I'm reading this, in the library, ditching school, sophomore, junior year in high school. I'm just like, like education, culture, and the culture of education and the mass media. Like, this is my countercultural, what is it? Briar patch. This is the proving ground. These long chapters were some of the most enlightening that I've ever read, and I want to share them with you all. And in such a world of conflict, a world of victims and executioners, it is the job of thinking people, as Albert Camus suggested, not to be on the side of the executioners. Still, understanding the complexities, this book will be skeptical of governments and their attempts, through politics and culture, to ensnare ordinary people in a giant web of nationhood pretending to a common interest. I will not try to overlook the cruelties that victims inflict on one another as they are jammed together in the boxcars of the system. So, he goes on to describe the founding of Jamestown. Jamestown itself was set up inside the territory of an Indian confederacy. When the English were going through their starving time in the winter of 1610, some of them ran off to join the Indians, where they would at least be fed. When the summer came, the governor of the colony sent a messenger to ask Powhatan, the chief of the tribe, to return the runaways. Whereupon Powhatan, according to the English account, replied with no other than proud and disdainful answers. Some soldiers were therefore sent out to take revenge. They fell upon an Indian settlement, killed 15 or 16 Indians, burned the houses, cut down the corn growing around the village, took the queen of the tribe and her children into boats, and then ended up throwing the children overboard and shooting out their brains in the water. The queen was later taken off and stabbed to death. 12 years later, the Indians, alarmed as the English settlements kept growing in number, apparently decided to try and wipe them out for good. They went on a rampage and massacred 347 men, women, and children. From then on, it was total war. So the Indians fight back on a rampage massacre, possibly a day. 347 men, women, and children died by Indian hands, which incensed the colonists. Not able to enslave the Indians and not able to live with them, the English decided to exterminate them. Within 2 or 3 years, the massacre, the English had avenged the deaths of that day many times over. The Puritans also appealed to the Bible. Psalms chapter 2, verse 8, "Ask of me, and I shall give thee the heathen for thine inheritance, and the uttermost parts of the earth for thy possession." And to justify their use of force to take the land, they cited Romans chapter 13, verse 2. Whoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. Okay. So the Puritans got God on their side, and after avenging the deaths that were killed by the Indians many times over, they don't stop. Captain John Mason's attack on the Pequot village in the Mystic River near Long Island Sound, Mason proposed to avoid attacking Pequot warriors, which would have overtaxed his unseasoned, unreliable troops. Battle, as such, was not his purpose. Battle is only one of the ways to destroy an enemy's will to fight. Massacre can accomplish the same, and with less risk, and Mason had determined that massacre would be his objective. Those that escaped the fire were slain with the sword. Some hewed to pieces, others run through with their rapiers. So as they were, this is an account by Mason. He's not a good speller. So they were quickly dispatched, and very few escaped. It was conceived they thus destroyed about 400 at this time. It was a fearful sight to see them thus frying in the fryer, and the streams of blood quenching the same. And horrible was the stink and sense thereof. But the victory seemed a sweet sacrifice, and they gave the prayers thereof to God, who had wrought so wonderfully for them, thus to enclose their enemies in their hands, and give them so speedy a victory over so proud and insulting an enemy. As Dr. Cotton Mather, Puritan theologian, put it, it was supposed that no less than 600 Pequot souls were brought down to hell that day. To hell. Jennings says that the elite of the Puritans wanted the war. Jennings is a historian. The ordinary white Englishmen did not want it and often refused to fight. The Indians certainly did not want war, but they matched atrocity with atrocity. When it was over in 1676, the English had won, but their resources were drained. They had lost 600 men. 3,000 Indians were dead, including Medicon himself. Yet the Indian raids did not stop. Medicon was the chief of the Pequot tribe. The Indians, a Dutch traveler in the New Netherland wrote in 1656 that the Indians affirmed that before the arrival of the Christians and before the smallpox broke out amongst them, they were 10 times as numerous as they now are, and that their population had been melted down by this disease, whereof 9/10 of them have died. When the English first settled Martha's Vineyard in 1642, the Wampanoags there numbered perhaps 3,000. There were no wars on the island, but by 1764, only 313 Indians were left there. Similarly, Block Island Indians numbered perhaps 1,200 to 1,500 in 1662, and by 1774 were reduced to 51. So smallpox, also the scourge that brought the Indians to their knees. How can the judgment be made if the benefits and losses cannot be balanced because the losses are either unmentioned or mentioned quickly? This again is Howard Zinn talking about his version of what People's History of the United States style of history is going to be. The quick disposal might be acceptable. The quick disposal of the losses because of the benefits. Unfortunate, yes, but it had to be done. Quote, to the middle and upper classes of the conquering and advanced countries. But is it acceptable to the poor of Asia, Africa, Latin America, or to the prisoners in Soviet labor camps, or the blacks in urban ghettos, or the Indians on reservations, to the victims of that progress which benefits a privileged minority in the world? Was it acceptable or just inescapable to the miners and railroaders of America, the factory hands, the men and women who died by the hundreds of thousands from accidents or sickness, where they worked or where they lived, casualties of progress? And even the privileged minority, must it not reconsider, with that practicality which even privilege cannot abolish, the value of its privileges when they become threatened by the anger of the sacrificed, whether in organized rebellion, unorganized riot, or simply those brutal individual acts of desperation labeled crimes by law and the state? What did people in Spain get out of all that death and brutality visited on the Indians of the Americas? For a brief period in history, there was the glory of a Spanish empire in the Western Hemisphere. As Hans Koenig sums it up in his book, Colubus, His Enterprise, for all the gold and silver stolen and shipped to Spain did not make the Spanish people richer. It gave their kings an edge in the balance of power for a time, a chance to hire more mercenary soldiers for their wars. They ended up losing those wars anyway, and all that was left was a deadly inflation, a starving population, the rich richer, the poor poorer, and a ruined peasant class. So the price of progress goes all the way up. Well, the rich get richer, but the price of progress is too great to be justified. A French Jesuit priest who encountered the Iroquois in 1650 wrote, "No poorhouses are needed among them, because they are neither mendicants nor paupers. Their kindness, humanity, and courtesy not only makes them liberal with what they have, but causes them to possess hardly anything except in common." So this is the Indian style of living that got wiped out in the confusion of the founding of America. John Collier, an American scholar who lived among Indians in the 1920s and 1930s in the American Southwest, said of their spirit, "Could we make it our own, there would be an eternally inexhaustible earth and a forever lasting peace." So, setting a tone for me in high school, and a lifestyle to live by. A native, we want to change the ethnography of our culture to a more native, a more balanced, a more giving, a more loving culture, and not take the People's History of the United States and use it as another form of hate to cast aspersions. If people support one side of history versus another side of history, that's all for them. I only ask that we don't change the policy of goodness in our nature. And I'll be honest, I fell I fell pretty deep into despair, knowing these facts of the truth behind American history. And I'm going to share them with you all in chapter by chapter reading or summary of each chapter of People's History of the United States. One of the main books in my countercultural formative development. Native nativist cultural upbringing. And I want to share it with you all. So please join me. Chapter 2 is coming up next. Drawing the color lines. Thank you.